Good evening. The first casualty of war is truth, we often hear. But some would argue that it's actually the other way around, that waging war becomes impossible if there's too much truth, if war's dirtiest secrets become too easily available. On Friday, the whistleblowing website Wikileaks published nearly 400,000 logs, mostly written by US soldiers serving in Iraq between 2004 and 2009. They describe how Iraqi security forces systematically beat and tortured prisoners and how US authorities routinely turned a blind eye. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange says he's setting the record straight.
In our release of these 400,000 documents about the Iraq War, the intimate detail of that war from the US perspective, we hope to correct some of that attack on the truth.
Well, his detractors say that the logs put lives at risk and undermine efforts to achieve peace and security in Iraq. Are they right, or do we have a right to know regardless of the consequences? We'll debate that question with Christopher Dickey, Middle East editor for Newsweek magazine. Good evening to you. Here on the set also Warwick Doyle, Professor of Global Communications at the American University of Paris. Good evening, Warwick. Joining us also from Cambridge, Massachusetts is Charles Cogan, who spent nearly 40 years in the CIA and is today an associate at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. Good evening to you, Charles Cogan. First,
Good evening. Glad to be here.
Let's take a look, firstly, before I get to the debate with my guests, just a reminder of the fallout from this WikiLeaks leak this weekend.
Beatings, electrocutions, sexual abuse, even killings. According to roughly 400,000 documents released through the WikiLeaks website, these are just some of the activities carried out by the Iraqi army and police. But while the reports were written by U.S. soldiers, in most cases they took no further action, leaving the matter to Iraqi authorities. On Sunday, the UN called on the Obama administration to carry out an independent and objective investigation. Pressure mounted for armed forces to be held accountable for their actions, even from within the coalition.
I'm assuming the US administration will want to provide its own answer. It's not for us to tell them how to do that. But anything that suggests that basic rules of war and conflict and of engagement have been broken, or that torture has in any way been condoned, are extremely serious and need to be looked at.
The leaks are also putting pressure on Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki. Sunday, Iraq's highest court ordered parliament to form a new government. The Shia and Sunni coalition parties were neck and neck in the March 7th elections. Neither bloc has been able to form a government since then.
The fact that these documents are being released now is no coincidence. I believe that some parties will use these documents and circulate them to serve their own interests in their race to power.
Al-Maliki would like to carry out a second term in office, but the WikiLeaks release could put a stop to his plans. The reports dating from 2006 onward describe events that took place while he was in office.
Okay, well, let's get into that debate on WikiLeaks. Christopher Dickey, I'd like to start with you. So there's obviously a debate about whether these logs should be taken at face value, whether you need a lot more context to understand the war in Iraq. Where do you stand on that?
Well, you do need a lot more context, and in fact, every country, every people that looks at these documents is likely to bring a very different and very specific context to them, because it's really just a great hodgepodge of information, a lot of it not analyzed, a lot of it not sorted, by a lot of soldiers on the ground who actually didn't know what was going on around them. So there are wonderfully interesting nuggets here, but the idea that this is going to compromise al-Maliki and his political campaign, come on, the Iraqis are some of the toughest, meanest people in the world. You don't think they know this was going on? Of course they knew it was going on. This is no surprise to them.
Yeah. Warwick Doyle, we're looking at this through a very sort of Western lens, aren't we? Do you think that these logs really have been hyped up? I mean, are they really not as significant as some of the media have made them out to be?
The media or the military?
No, I mean some of the editorials saying, you know, that this is a bombshell, that it's going to damage Maliki, it's going to damage Obama, and so on.
And of course, the moral issue that's been projected is that it puts the informers to the coalition forces in Afghanistan at risk, and at risk of death. And so that's one of the major accusations. To me, it's ironic if we consider the argument to go into Iraq in the first place, which was all about the atrocities of Saddam Hussein and the horrors of the Saddam Hussein regime, is that now what is being revealed, and perhaps this is where I'm not quite in agreement with Mr. Dickey, they may have known it's going on, but knowledge is not everything. There's now the evidence, including the visual evidence of these events. And visual evidence, as we've seen in Abu Ghraib photos, are extremely powerful in public opinion. So it's certainly no surprise to them, but it doesn't mean there isn't a public, there won't be a public reaction to them.
I don't want to be cynical here, but look, I remember Martin van Creveld talking to me about this in about 2004, 2005, one of the best authors of books on counterinsurgency there is. Counterinsurgency is a very tough game. Basically, you have to convince the population that you can protect them from the bad guys, but the bad guys can't protect them from you. And that's exactly the game the Iraqis played. And when the United States went into that, with all of its rules of war, with all of its compunction about doing one thing and another, I say good for the United States to believe all those things. But as Van Creveld said, what were we going to teach the Iraqis about counterinsurgency? We put Saddam Hussein on trial and hung him for what he was doing in counterinsurgency, and he was very successful at it for years. So this is a country coming out of this trauma that was used to this kind of thing, and I'm not saying it was okay for the United States to condone it or to turn a blind eye, but it's another reason why the United States shouldn't have been there in the first place.
But you're saying that it would have been unrealistic to expect the U.S. not to turn a blind eye in the historical context.
Of course, and what the United States is going to go into a country where, first of all, it doesn't establish control, tries to go in on the cheap, says stuff happens when there's looting all over the country, allows order to deteriorate completely, and then by the fall of 2003 is desperate to regain order, desperate to even find out who's attacking its troops, doesn't know any of this. So during those very tough years, 2004, 2005, 2006, things got very bloody indeed. And one of the best stories to come out of this is a New York Times story that shows that the surge worked in 2007, mainly because the Iraqis were so exhausted and sick and tired of slaughtering each other that they finally turned to the Americans for protection.
Let's bring in Charles Kogan from Harvard. He's coming to us from Massachusetts, from Cambridge. Charles Kogan, just your initial reactions on this leak. Do you think it's irresponsible, like a lot of editorials in the papers have said, and of course like US officials have said?
Well, it's irresponsible. Now I'm referring to the Afghan leaks because I think it's too early to examine completely the Iraqi leaks. But the Afghan leaks, as one of your speakers said, has endangered the lives of those people, those Afghans who are collaborating with the Americans. And it's interesting to note that the Taliban, just the last couple of days, said that they had formed a group to study and analyze these names and figure out which people they should take action against. So that it's very harmful from that point of view. Now, as far as the Iraqi leaks go, I think that the American military, the CIA, other elements of the intelligence community are examining these with a fine-tooth comb. There's a hell of a lot of documents. They are, by the way, authentic, of course. It's very low level. There are no great state secrets, but they seem to reveal three things. One, damage done by the Americans, particularly the contractors. Secondly, damage done by the Iraqi troops themselves. And thirdly, I haven't seen the documents, but there's a much greater participation of the Iranians in this whole show than anybody imagined.
Are you, I mean, obviously the difference with the Afghan files is that with the Iraqi logs, the names of the authors were deleted. Do you believe that's at least some sort of progress in this very wild frontier, if you like, this new WikiLeaks phenomenon?
Well, we always like the truth to come out, but I'm not totally sure that these Iraqi blogs have been totally sanitized or sterilized, and there are no names and no damaging information.